The year was 34 and New York no longer belonged solely to humankind. Once a sprawling city of steel and glass, it had transformed into a hybrid skyline where human ingenuity fused with alien architecture. Needle-thin towers pulsed with bioluminescent veins shimmering against the twilight haze, while colossal orbital elevators reached up into the black heavens like strands of a web connecting Earth to the stars. Plasma trains zipped silently across magnetic rails above the streets, ferrying citizens of every imaginable species. The city's heartbeat was an endless hum of technology and voices, some human, some not. High above it all, in a penthouse nested within the crystalline spire of Hale Tower, Sophie Arland polished the edge of a glass table until the surface gleamed like liquid moonlight. Her hands moved with quiet efficiency, her posture precise, yet there was an elegance to her every gesture that no training manual could instill. She was 23, a maid by trade, bound by contract to serve Tony Hale, one of the city's wealthiest merchants. But despite her uniform and station, Sophie's presence seemed almost unearthly. Her long raven hair, tied loosely at the back, shimmered under the artificial daylight panels. Her skin carried a pale radiance untouched by genetic enhancements or cosmetic engineering. And most striking of all were her eyes, silver, reflective, as if holding within them the memory of distant stars. The residents of Neo-New York often engineered beauty, sculpted cheekbones, flawless skin, eyes replaced with luminous implants. Yet Sophie was untouched, wholly human. This made her both an anomaly and a curiosity, though she never encouraged attention. She worked in silence, carrying herself with humility. Still, she could not stop the whispers from those who passed through Tony Hale's lavish home. Why does he keep her here, this girl with eyes like polished steel? Sophie ignored such murmurs. Her life was defined by service, not speculation. She folded linens, prepared the merchant's table for alien guests whose limbs bent at impossible angles, and moved through the penthouse halls as if she were invisible. But tonight, as the neon glow of the city filtered through the panoramic glass walls, Sophie felt an unusual heaviness in the air. Tony Hale was late returning from his negotiations at the orbital docks. It was not uncommon. Alien trade guilds often held their meetings deep into the artificial night, but Sophie had learned to sense when something was wrong. She glanced toward the skyline, her silver eyes catching a reflection of the glowing spires. For a moment, she let herself imagine walking among them freely, without chains of duty or contracts. She imagined stepping aboard one of the plasma trains, vanishing into the unknown corners of the galaxy, where no one would know her as a servant. The sound of the penthouse doors sliding open snapped her back. Tony entered, his expression stern, his posture weary. He was a man in his early 30s, tall, sharp-suited, and groomed in the manner of the city's elite, yet there was something unsettled in his eyes tonight. Sophie bowed her head, stepping forward with the grace of her station. "Welcome home, sir," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm cadence of someone who had long practiced restraint. Tony nodded, but did not immediately respond. He studied her for a moment, too long perhaps, and something unspoken flickered in his gaze. Sophie turned away quickly, pretending not to notice. She did not know yet that these glances had been growing for months, each one lingering a little longer, each one carrying weight that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Outside, the city roared with alien voices and human ambition. Inside, in the quiet glow of the penthouse, the first threads of a story neither of them yet understood began to weave themselves into the night. The evening stretched on like an endless corridor of neon light. Outside the penthouse windows, New York's sky was painted in shifting colors. Indigo clouds pierced by golden airships, violet streaks trailing from the plasma rails, and the soft glow of alien runes projected onto the glass towers of visiting guilds. Inside, however, silence reigned. Sophie moved quietly from one room to another, her soft steps barely audible against the polished floors. She had grown accustomed to silence. It was the language of servants. Yet tonight the quiet was broken by the restless presence of Tony Hale. He sat slouched in his leather chair at the far end of the great hall, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He was not drunk. Tony was far too disciplined for that. But his movements carried a heaviness Sophie had rarely seen. "Did the guilds accept your proposal, sir?" Sophie asked, her voice cautious, more out of duty than curiosity. Tony looked up. The city's glow spilled across his face, highlighting the faint weariness in his features. He studied her before answering, as if measuring her worthiness to hear his troubles. "They didn't accept." "Not yet," he said at last. "They never do. They circle like predators, waiting for weakness, waiting for me to slip." His gaze lingered on Sophie, and for a brief, dangerous moment he allowed himself to forget she was only a maid. She lowered her eyes respectfully and began tidying the side table, aligning coasters with geometric precision. Tony's words might have unsettled another servant, but Sophie had long grown used to the rhythm of alien politics that bled into this household. She knew the threats behind those trade meetings. She had seen the visitors, Jari diplomats, with gleaming obsidian skin, Virans with insect-like mandibles that clicked in amusement, and others whose shapes were cloaked to spare human sensibilities. Each had passed through this very hall, speaking in voices that bent the air itself. "You don't trust them," Sophie said quietly, more statement than question. Tony's lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "Trust? Trust is for children, Sophie. In this city, in this year, in this world, there is no trust. There is only leverage." The word hung in the air like smoke. Sophie hesitated, then looked at him. His eyes, sharp, tired, and undeniably human, were fixed on her. It was not the gaze of a master commanding a servant. It was something else, something he should not allow himself. She turned away quickly, setting down the last glass before her. Her fingers betrayed the tremor that threatened them. Sophie had known admiration before, fleeting, shallow glances from visitors, but Tony's gaze was different. It was steady, unspoken, and dangerous. "I'll prepare your meal," she murmured. Eager to break the moment, as she walked toward the kitchen, Tony exhaled slowly. He hated himself for it, for watching her, for thinking of her in ways he could not admit, even to his closest allies. She was a maid, a servant bound by contract, and he was a merchant whose name opened doors in both human and alien courts. And yet, as the shadows of the neon-lit skyline flickered across Sophie's silver eyes, he felt something unravel inside him. In the kitchen, Sophie steadied herself against the counter. She had felt the weight of his stare. She had seen its persistence grow over months, like ivy creeping along glass, until it blocked out the sun. She feared it, not because it was unwelcome, but because it hinted at a future she dared not imagine. The city outside roared, its voice a symphony of progress and power. Within the quiet walls of Hale Tower, however, another battle began, silent, unspoken, and far more dangerous. Neither Sophie nor Tony understood it yet, but the balance of their world had shifted. And in Neo-New York, where humans and aliens danced on a fragile thread of treaties, even a glance could be a weapon, and even love could become a war. The city never slept, but on nights like this, New York seemed more alive than ever. The skyline shimmered with alien banners projected high into the clouds, each sigil glowing with cryptic energy that no human hand had designed. Massive freighters drifted between the towers carrying goods from star systems Sophie could not even pronounce. Yet beneath the dazzling lights, shadows crept. The wealth of alien trade had not erased danger, it had only sharpened it. Sophie polished the crystalline panels lining the entryway, her reflection fractured across their faceted surfaces. She moved like clockwork, silent and composed, but her silver eyes flicked often toward the penthouse doors. Tony had been restless since last night, and she had learned that his unease always preceded trouble. The chime of the doors cut through the air. Sophie stepped back instinctively as they slid open with a low hiss. Tony entered, flanked by two security drones, and behind him came a figure who seemed to warp the very atmosphere. He was tall, imposingly so, with skin the color of obsidian polished to a mirror sheen. His shoulders were wrapped in a cloak that shimmered like oil on water, constantly shifting hue. His eyes burned with a dim crimson glow, not from implants but from something deeper, something alien and ancient. This was Dravik Zir, Syndicate, leader of the Jari. His name alone was enough to make merchants whisper in fear, and Sophie understood at once why. "Welcome to Hale Tower," Tony said stiffly, though his voice carried the strain of forced politeness. Dravik's mouth curved into a smile that was not a smile. "Your hospitality is acceptable, Hale." His gaze shifted, and for the briefest second those glowing eyes fell upon Sophie. They lingered there, sharp and calculating, as though assessing her worth not as a person, but as a piece on a board. Sophie bowed her head quickly, willing her breath to steady. She had faced alien guests before, but none like this. Dravik's presence was suffocating, his aura one of power, wielded without mercy. Tony gestured toward the dining chamber, but Dravik did not immediately follow. Instead, he stepped closer to Sophie, his shadow stretched over her, vast and heavy. "A human maid," he said softly, though his words echoed with unsettling resonance. "How quaint and rare." Tony's jaw tightened. "She is not of importance, merely staff." Dravik chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "Nothing is merely anything in this city, Hale. Every servant, every glance, every secret has its value." Sophie forced herself to remain still, but inside her pulse thundered. She felt exposed like prey caught beneath the gaze of a predator. Yet she lifted her head, just enough to meet his crimson eyes with her silver ones. For a heartbeat there was silence, two worlds colliding in a gaze. Dravik tilted his head, amused. Then he moved past her, cloak trailing like smoke. "Shall we discuss business?" The tension eased as he vanished into the dining chamber with Tony. Still, Sophie's breath came unsteady. She leaned briefly against the cool glass wall, her reflection shimmering with the city lights. She had seen something in Dravik's look, not just curiosity, but recognition, as if he had discovered a weakness in the fortress of Tony Hale. From within the dining chamber, muted voices began to rise. Tony's steady baritone, Dravik's smooth venom, the occasional metallic hum of translation drones. Sophie should not have listened, but her instincts told her the night was already rewriting the future, and she was right. For in Dravik's mind, as negotiations unfurled, a seed had been planted. Sophie Arland, the silver-eyed maid, could be more than a servant. She could be leverage. Outside, the skyline pulsed with alien colors, beautiful and terrible. Inside, Hale Tower, shadows had entered, and they would not leave quietly. The night after Dravik's visit hung over Hale Tower like a storm cloud refusing to break. The city glowed, as it always did, streets alive with neon sigils, sky rails streaking violet fire through the atmosphere, but inside Tony's penthouse, the silence was suffocating. Sophie moved carefully, her hand steady, though her thoughts were not. She had not forgotten Dravik's eyes, crimson and unyielding, fixed on her, as if he had already decided her fate. She had never felt so exposed. Yet tonight, it wasn't only the alien syndicate leader who haunted her, it was the man she served, Tony. Hale stood by the glass wall that stretched across the entire living room, staring at the city as if it might answer the questions he couldn't. A tumbler of amber liquid rested untouched in his hand. His reflection was sharp against the glass, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Sophie approached silently, carrying a tray with his evening meal, though she suspected he wouldn't eat. "Set it down," Tony murmured, without turning. She obeyed, placing the tray with careful precision. Yet she lingered, her instincts telling her he wasn't simply distracted, he was unraveling, caught between worlds she could only glimpse. Finally, he spoke. "Sophie, do you ever think about leaving this city?" The question startled her, though his voice was calm. She hesitated. "Leaving, sir?" "Yes, walking away from all of it. The towers, the guilds, the endless negotiations, just leaving." He turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers across the polished floor. For once there was no shield of merchant's pride in his gaze. He looked human, tired, vulnerable, searching. Sophie lowered her eyes, the weight of his stare too much. "It isn't something I allow myself to imagine." "Why not?" His voice pressed, gentle but insistent. "Because I don't have the freedom to choose." The words slipped out sharper than she intended, but they were true. She was bound by contract, by station, by the invisible chains of servitude. Freedom was not a dream she dared nurture. Tony's hand tightened around the glass. He stepped forward, his polished shoes silent against the floor. "You deserve more than this, more than polishing tables and serving drinks while men like Dravik look at you as if you're an object to trade." Her breath caught. He had noticed. He had seen the way Dravik's eyes lingered. "Sir," she began, but Tony cut across her. "No, Sophie. Don't call me that. Not now." His voice broke slightly on the words. He stopped just a step away from her, his presence filling the space like a force she couldn't ignore. "You have to know, I've tried to stop it. I've tried to bury it. But every time I see you—" She looked up, silver eyes locking with his. Time seemed to fracture, the hum of the city fading beyond the glass. His confession was unfinished, but she already knew what he meant. She had known it for months, even as she tried to pretend otherwise. "Tony—" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, carrying both warning and something dangerously close to longing. He exhaled, his hand lifting as if to touch her, but stopping inches away, suspended in hesitation. "You're not just a maid. Not to me. Not anymore." Sophie's pulse thundered. She should have stepped back, should have reminded him of the roles that chained them both. Yet she didn't. She stood still, caught between fear and the ache of something she had never dared name. Sharp chime shattered the moment. The security drones whirred to life as a coded signal flashed across the penthouse walls. An incoming message, urgent, encrypted. Tony cursed under his breath, turning sharply toward the console. Sophie remained frozen, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The confession lingered between them, unfinished but undeniable, while the shadows of a greater danger pressed in from beyond the glass. The encrypted signal pulsed across the penthouse walls, painting the room in shades of scarlet. Sophie stiffened where she stood, her reflection fractured in the crystal panels. Tony strode to the console, fingers flying across the holographic keys. The security drones hovered closer, their lenses glowing as they scanned for threats. The message cracked open with a hiss of static. A face emerged in the hologram, obsidian skin gleaming, crimson eyes burning like embers. "Dravik Yarir. Merchant Hale," his voice rasped, distorted but unmistakable. "You sit in your tower, guarded by glass and metal, believing yourself safe. But safety is an illusion. In this city, leverage is survival, and I've found yours." His gaze shifted, deliberate and unhurried, until it locked on Sophie. Though the transmission was a projection, the weight of it pressed against her chest. Tony stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. "Stay away from her." Dravik's laugh was soft, guttural, the sound of a predator amused by its prey. "You make it too obvious, Hale. A servant, a maid, and yet your eyes betray you every time they find her. Do you think the syndicate cannot see? Do you think I cannot use what you value most?" The hologram shimmered, flickering in and out. But the threat was carved into every word. "Leave her out of this," Tony growled. "Your quarrel is with me, with the contracts, with the trade routes, not her." Dravik leaned closer, the crimson glow of his eyes expanding as if the hologram itself bent to his will. Everything is currency, Hale. Even love, especially love. The feed cut abruptly, plunging the room into silence. Only the hum of the drones and the faint thrum of the city below remained. Sophie's hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to move, to speak, to breathe, but the walls felt too close. She had been watched, measured, reduced to a pawn in a game. She never agreed to play. Tony turned to her, his expression hard. But beneath it, Sophie saw the storm raging. He crossed the room quickly, his hand almost reaching for hers before stopping short. "Sophie, listen to me. He won't touch you. I won't let him." Her silver eyes lifted to his. "You can't promise that. Not against someone like him. I can." His voice was firm, though his chest rose with heavy breaths. "I will." For a long moment they stood in the crimson glow, the echo of Dravik's words thick between them. Sophie felt torn open, caught between fear and something deeper, something dangerous that she no longer had the strength to deny. She saw it in Tony, too, the unguarded truth in his eyes. "Why me?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Why do I matter?" Tony's reply came without hesitation. "Because you make this place human again, because every day I see the city rot with greed, and then I see you, honest, steady, alive, and I remember what's worth protecting." Sophie's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of the distance between their stations. But Dravik's words still clung to her skin. Everything is currency, even love. A sudden boom rattled the glass walls. Far below, an explosion painted the streets in violent orange light. Alarms screamed through the city, echoing up the towers. Tony snapped toward the window, jaw set. "He's making his move," Tony said, his voice a blade. He glanced back at Sophie, determination burning in his eyes. "And he's not getting you." The city roared in chaos outside, but Sophie knew the greater war had already begun, inside these walls, inside their hearts, and in the crimson gaze of a syndicate, leader who had marked her as both weakness and weapon. The rain had just ended when Sophie stepped onto the rooftop terrace of Tony's high-rise. Droplets clung to the glass barriers like scattered stars, refracting the neon skyline of New York 3457 into kaleidoscopic patterns. Airships drifted. Between towering spires, their thrusters humming like the lull of a mechanical ocean. Yet Sophie wasn't admiring the city. She was listening, her ears tuned not to the bustle of humanity, but to the faint distortion in the frequencies above. Something was out there. Tony joined her, his footsteps unsteady on the slick surface. He'd been restless since the dinner party, his thoughts circling around Sophie like moths to a flame. "You've been distracted," he said, his voice carrying both accusation and curiosity, "since that night with the senators, since you touched that thing." Sophie turned slowly, her eyes gleaming in the faint light. For the first time, she didn't bother masking the sharpness in her gaze. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Tony pressed. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the drone of passing traffic. Then, softly, Sophie said, "The relic wasn't just decoration, it was alive. At least, in a way, it resonated with me. That's why the alien emissary kept watching me." Tony's chest tightened. He had seen it too, the way the being's elongated pupils had narrowed, locked on Sophie as if recognizing something hidden beneath her human guise. He wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the memory clung stubbornly. "What are you?" he asked, the words heavier than he intended. Sophie's lips parted, then sealed again. She stepped closer, her presence disarming, despite the chill in the air. "I'm what this city doesn't want to remember," she whispered. "A fragment of a treaty, broken long before you were born." The ground beneath them seemed to tilt. Tony gripped the railing, trying to steady himself against the weight of her confession. "You're saying you're not human?" "I was made to be," Sophie said, her tone almost bitter. "Designed to blend, to serve, to remain unnoticed. but I carry their code, the alien signature, woven into my being. A flash of memory flickered in her mind. Sterile laboratories, chains of DNA rearranged under cold blue lights, and voices debating the ethics of hybridization. She pushed it down, but the echo lingered, vibrating in her chest. Tony staggered, back, shaken. Yet the more he looked at her, the less monstrous she seemed. Instead, there was something profoundly tragic in her words. "All this time," he murmured, "you were hiding." "I had to," Sophie replied, her voice firm now. "If they knew, if the government, if the corporations, if even the emissaries realized, this city would burn to root me out. And you, Tony, you'd be collateral." He wanted to argue, to demand she trust him, but deep inside he understood. This world thrived on exploitation. Secrets weren't kept. They were sold. The skyline flashed as a thunderhead split the night, its lightning revealing a formation of vessels hovering just beyond the city's orbital shield. Tony saw them only briefly, but Sophie's eyes narrowed with recognition. "They've come for me," she said quietly. Tony's throat ran dry. "And what happens if they find you?" Sophie looked back at him, and for the first time, her beauty seemed almost otherworldly, carved from sorrow and defiance. "Then you'll finally understand what I truly am, and why love, if you mean it, might be the most dangerous choice you'll ever make." The rooftop fell silent again, but the weight of her truth hung heavier than the storm clouds above. Tony realized that his world had already shifted, and there was no turning back. The morning broke with a false calm. From Tony's penthouse window, the city glittered as though nothing had changed, airships weaving through crystalline towers, alien vendors calling out in polyphonic tongues, neon billboards pulsing promises of a brighter tomorrow. But above, the haze, Sophie's eyes caught the faint distortion in the skies. The vessels she'd glimpsed the night before were still there, cloaked, circling like predators just beyond the orbital shield. Tony hadn't slept. He sat hunched at the dining table, a glass of untouched synth whiskey in his hand. His gaze flickered to Sophie every few seconds, unable to reconcile the truth she'd confessed with the woman who had folded his shirts, polished his silverware, and smiled at him as if she belonged in his quiet, orderly life. "You're sure they've come for you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sophie stood by the window, her figure framed by the glow of the city. "I don't need to be sure," she said softly. "I can feel it. Their signal pulses in my chest. They're calling me." "Then why stay?" Tony's voice cracked with frustration. "If leaving will keep them from tearing this place apart, why not just go?" Sophie turned, her expression sharpened by shadows. "Because running won't end it. They'll follow me, and eventually they'll turn their eyes on Earth itself. I'm not just their quarry, Tony. I'm their message, proof that humanity crossed lines it swore never to cross." Her words settled heavy between them. Tony leaned back, exhaling sharply. "So what? What's your plan? Hide forever? Fight them? You're one person." Sophie hesitated, then lifted her hand. The skin along her palm rippled, breaking into faint luminous lines, circuitry woven seamlessly into flesh. "I may be one person," she said, "but I wasn't made defenseless. They built me with purpose. I just don't know if I'm ready to fulfill it." Tony stared, half terrified, half in awe. The delicate glow of her hand cast pale light on her face, accentuating the strange balance of fragility and strength in her. For the first time, he realized how much danger she had been in simply by existing here. Before he could speak again, the room trembled. The lights flickered, the hum of the power grid faltered. Sophie's head snapped upward. "They're probing the shield," she whispered, testing its strength. The city's emergency sirens wailed a second later, their banshee cry echoing off glass towers. Screens across the skyline lit up with government broadcasts. "Remain indoors. This is not a drill. Orbital defenses have been engaged." Tony rushed to the balcony, gripping the rail. Through the veil of atmosphere, faint silhouettes broke from the clouds, sleek obsidian ships shaped like crescent blades gliding silently, as though space itself bent around them. "They've never come this close before," Sophie murmured, stepping beside him. Her eyes burned with recognition and fear. "If they breach the shield, they won't come for your armies or your politicians. They'll come straight for me." "And what then?" Tony asked, desperation clawing into his voice. Sophie met his gaze, her beauty stark against the chaos unraveling beyond. "Then I have to decide if I'm their weapon or their resistance." The building shuddered violently. From the street below rose the roar of panic. Humans and aliens alike scattering beneath the falling shimmer of defense drones streaking toward the sky. One drone, larger than the rest, hovered into view just outside Tony's balcony. Its lens swiveled, locking onto Sophie. Her breath caught. The lens pulsed once, a deep crimson. "Recognition. Transmission. They've found me," she whispered. Tony grabbed her arm. "Then we fight." But Sophie shook her head slowly, her luminous hand trembling as the drone's signal carved into her core. "No, Tony. To fight them, I'll have to become what they made me. And if I do, you may not recognize me anymore." The drone's crimson beam widened, painting Sophie's face in alien light. The choice she had avoided her entire life was no longer hers to postpone. The drone's crimson light expanded, casting Sophie in a glow that made her look less human and more like a figure sculpted from starlight. Tony's breath caught in his throat as he reached instinctively toward her, but Sophie did not move. Her pupils constricted, her veins flickering faintly with threads of silver as the drone signal resonated inside her. "They're activating me," she said, her voice low, strained, as though fighting against an unseen force. The code in my blood. It's not just a tracker, it's a command." The drone released a sharp pulse that cracked the glass doors of the penthouse. Furniture rattled, and lights dimmed until the city beyond seemed swallowed in shadow. Sophie dropped to her knees, clutching her chest. Her skin burned with radiant lines that spread like constellations across her arms and neck. Tony knelt beside her, ignoring the heat emanating from her body. "Fight it!" he pleaded, his voice trembling. "You're not their creation anymore. You're you, Sophie." Her gaze flicked to him, and for a moment her eyes softened. But the drone's beam intensified, and the softness shattered. A voice, alien, metallic, and layered in echoes, spoke through the machine. "Subject LX-9, comply, return to the Veil." Sophie's scream tore through the air as her body arched, releasing a surge of energy that rippled across the room. The drone shattered into fragments, sparks raining down like falling stars. Tony stumbled back, shielding his face from the burst. When the light faded, Sophie was no longer on her knees. She stood tall, her hair whipping in a phantom wind, her skin alive with pulsing circuitry that mapped her body like sacred runes. Her voice, when she spoke, carried both human warmth and alien resonance. "I am not your subject," she said. "I am not your weapon." But even as she declared it, Tony saw the tremor in her stance, the uncertainty in her tone. Outside, the sky erupted, the cloaked vessels uncloaked fully, descending like black crescents of doom. Orbital defenses launched beams of plasma, streaks of light cutting across the atmosphere. Explosions thundered above the skyline, and towers trembled with the impact. Yet Tony couldn't look away from Sophie, because she had become the axis of this unfolding storm. She turned to him, her expression both fierce and broken. "Tony, you need to leave." "Leave?" he barked, incredulous. "While you stand here lighting up like a beacon for every alien ship in orbit? Not a chance." "You don't understand." Her voice shook. I can feel the tether pulling tighter. "If I lose control, I won't just fight them. I'll destroy everything around me." Before Tony could respond, another drone burst through the shattered balcony door, its tendrils whipping like serpents of metal. Sophie's hand shot forward. On instinct, energy coalesced in her palm, an orb of light so brilliant Tony had to shield his eyes. She hurled it at the drone. The explosion painted the walls with fire, vaporizing steel and sending a shockwave that cracked the marble floor. Breathless, Sophie stared at her glowing hand, horrified. "This is what they made me for," she whispered, "to annihilate." Tony stepped toward her, ignoring the heat, the chaos, the danger outside. His voice was steady, defiant. "Then prove them wrong. Use it for yourself. Use it for us." Her gaze locked with his, and something shifted inside her. For the first time, she saw her power not as a chain, but as a choice. She clenched her fist, dimming the glow until only faint traces remained. But the battle outside grew louder, closer. Alien ships descended lower, the city's defenses crumbling under the weight of their assault. Sophie knew the fight was no longer a distant threat. It was here, demanding her decision. She turned back to Tony, her eyes shimmering with both fear and determination. "Then stay close," she said, "because if I'm going to fight, I'll need you to remind me who I am." And with that, Sophie stepped out onto the balcony, facing the descending shadows with the storm blazing quietly inside her. The night sky above New York had turned into a theater of chaos. Alien ships, black as obsidian and crescent-shaped, pierced the atmosphere with an almost predatory elegance. Their engines burned with violet plasma, streaking the clouds with ethereal light. Sophie stood at the edge of the penthouse balcony, her silver eyes reflecting the inferno of the city, circuits along her skin faintly glowing, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Tony crouched beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly. "You ready?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophie exhaled, a mist forming in the cool air. "I have to be. There's no other choice." Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay the weight of the city and every life that would be lost if she failed. Below, the streets had become rivers of panic. Hover cars screeched sideways to avoid falling debris, and crowds scattered as automated. Defense drones fired warning volleys of energy at descending enemy vessels. The city's holographic billboards flickered and died, leaving the skyline eerily dark except for the alien lights above. Sophie's hand lifted instinctively, and the circuits across her arms expanded, glowing with silvery light, like a constellation. Come alive! Her power resonated with the descending ships. Energy rippled from her fingertips, forming arcs that lanced outward like lightning, striking the nearest craft. The impact detonated in a burst of violet plasma, and the ship spiraled violently before crashing into the Hudson with a thunderous explosion. Tony's jaw tightened. "You're doing it. But there are too many." "I know," Sophie said, her voice low but unwavering. "I can't fight them all, but I can hold them." Another wave of ships broke through the clouds, faster, more precise, coordinated as if they were part of a single sentient organism. Sophie's silver eyes narrowed, and her body hummed with tension. She thrust her hands forward, releasing waves of energy that split and expanded mid-air, intercepting the ship's plasma weapons. Each strike sent shock waves that rattled the penthouse and shattered nearby glass towers. From the balcony, Tony could feel the raw force of her abilities. Each pulse seemed alive, an extension of her will, delicate yet devastating. He reached for her again, not to restrain, but to anchor her. "Sophie, remember us. Remember who you are." Her gaze met his for a heartbeat, and in that instant the chaos outside felt almost distant. The alien ships hesitated, their formation wobbling, as if sensing the depth of her control. She channeled the energy inward, letting it condense into a focused sphere the size of a small car. With a silent command, she hurled it upward, slicing through 3 ships in one devastating arc. The explosion ignited the night sky, and fragments rained down onto the city like burning stars. Yet even as the brilliance faded, Sophie's power throbbed with fatigue. Sweat streaked across her forehead, and the circuits along her arms dimmed slightly, warning of strain. She fell to one knee, gasping for breath, while Tony knelt beside her. "They're regrouping," she whispered. "They'll come again." Tony's hand lifted to her cheek, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "Then we'll be ready. Together?" Sophie's silver eyes softened, and a fleeting smile crossed her face, fragile, yet radiant. For the first time, she felt the balance of control. The power in her blood was no longer a curse, but a shield. Above them, the alien ships hovered, calculating, patient. The war was far from over, but for tonight, Sophie had carved a sliver of victory from the sky itself, and the city below remained breathing, trembling, alive. As distant sirens echoed and the glow of fires painted the skyline, Sophie rose to her feet, energy still simmering in her veins. Tony mirrored her, resolute. Together they faced the descending shadows, two human hearts entwined in the eye of a cosmic storm. The city was theirs to defend, and Sophie had finally awakened to the truth of her power. The city was trembling in the aftermath. Smoke rose from shattered streets, and neon lights flickered erratically as emergency generators struggled to maintain power. Sophie stood atop Tony's penthouse balcony, surveying the chaos below. Each explosion, each burning vehicle, each scream of panicked citizens reminded her of the magnitude of what had just transpired, and the price yet to come. Tony approached quietly, his suit scorched in places from the energy backlash. "You did it," he said, voice strained. "But at what cost?" Sophie didn't answer immediately. Her silver eyes reflected the fires below, flickering with residual energy still coursing through her veins. "They'll regroup," she said finally, her tone measured. "This isn't the end. They're testing us." "Testing me." Tony reached for her hand and she allowed it, though the warmth was almost a distraction from the tremor in her body. "We need allies," he said. "People who understand what we're facing. If Dravik knows your capabilities, he'll move faster now. We can't fight him alone." Sophie's gaze hardened. "Allies," she repeated. "Do you know how few truly care about humans or hybrids like me?" Her voice carried a bitterness born from years of hiding in plain sight, from being trained as both servant and weapon. "Trust is a luxury we cannot afford." Tony stepped closer, resolute. "Then we make them care." A distant pulse interrupted their conversation. Sophie stiffened immediately, instincts flaring. Through the haze of smoke and rising heat, a fleet of sleek silver ships descended, their markings unlike any Dravik's emissaries had used. They hovered above the skyline, scanning, calculating. Tony followed her gaze. "They're not Dravik's," he said cautiously. "Who are they?" Sophie's circuits hummed faintly under her skin, sensing the unfamiliar energy signature. "Independent operatives," she whispered. "They've been tracking the syndicate for months, maybe years. If we can contact them, we might finally have a chance." But even as she spoke, her instincts warned her. Nothing came without strings. In this city, especially in 3457 New York, where humans and aliens had coexisted uneasily, and every act of kindness could be leveraged as a weapon. Tony exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Then we reach out. But first, you need rest. You can't keep burning through your energy like this." Sophie shook her head slowly. "Rest? No. Dravik will strike again before dawn. I can feel it. Every fiber of my being tells me he's planning something worse, something designed to break me completely." Tony's jaw tightened. "Then we prepare. Together." For a moment they stood in silence, the wind whipping their hair, the city below trembling yet alive. Sophie's powers, once a secret and a burden, had become a beacon. But that beacon drew not just protection, it drew enemies closer, calculated and patient, waiting for a misstep. Her thoughts drifted to Dravik. The syndicate leader had seen her potential, her beauty, her strength, and he had marked her as both prize and pawn. The idea of confronting him again made her pulse quicken, not just with fear, but with something darker, defiance. "Tony," she said finally, voice low, "we have to be smarter. Every move we make from this point forward is a gamble. And Dravik, he always plays to win." Tony placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Then we play smarter, not just to survive, but to turn the game back on him. Sophie allowed herself a small nod, though inside, tension coiled tight. Her power still thrummed beneath the surface, ready to ignite at any second. The city had survived tonight, but the war was far from over. And she understood now that her awakening had fractured more than buildings. It had fractured the illusions she once clung to, that she could remain hidden, that she could remain safe, that she could remain merely Sophie, the servant. The skyline blazed behind them, the city trembling under the echo of her first real battle, while new shadows formed beyond the horizon, shadows that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. And Sophie, hybrid servant and reluctant warrior, would have to rise higher than ever before to face what came next. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the smoke and debris that still hung over New York. Streets below were choked with twisted metal, overturned vehicles, and the scattered remnants of Dravik's fleet. But even in the ruins the city throbbed with life, a stubborn heartbeat refusing to die. Sophie stood on the edge of Tony's balcony, her silver eyes scanning the horizon for the first signs of a counterattack. She could feel it coming. The rhythm of her circuits pulsed in anticipation. Tony joined her silently, his gaze following hers. "They won't wait long," he said, tension thick in his voice. Dravik always responds when challenged. Sophie's lips pressed into a thin line. "I know. He's patient, calculating. He watches, waits, then strikes where it hurts most." A sudden distortion in the skyline caught their attention. A massive transport ship, black as obsidian and shaped like a crescent moon, descending into the heart of the city. It moved with precision, bypassing orbital defenses and evading patrol drones as though guided by someone who knew every flaw in the system. "That's him," Sophie whispered, a cold edge to her voice. "Dravik." Tony's jaw tightened. "And this time?" Sophie didn't answer immediately. She raised her hand, circuits flaring to life across her skin. A soft hum filled the penthouse, resonating with the city itself. "This time, I make him see me, not the servant, not the pawn, me." As the transport ship touched down in Times Square, releasing legions of armored enforcers, Sophie stepped forward. Her eyes glimmered, not just with silver, but with the latent energy of her hybrid bloodline. Tony followed, instinctively matching her pace, both of them descending into the chaos below. The streets were a battlefield. Citizens scrambled, but many paused to witness the strange light radiating from Sophie, her power both terrifying and mesmerizing. Alien enforcers moved with lethal precision, their armor reflecting the neon signs above. And above them all, Dravik's figure emerged, tall, imposing, his crimson eyes scanning the crowd until they found her. "Sophie," he called, his voice echoing unnaturally, amplified by some hidden transmitter. "At last, you reveal yourself. I wondered how long it would take for the servant to step out of the shadows." She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not a servant anymore," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. "I'm me, and you won't control me." Dravik's lips curved into a slow, cruel smile. "Control? No. I seek recognition, Sophie. Recognition of power. And inevitability." The enforcers surged forward, weapons charged, plasma blades igniting. Sophie's circuits flared in response. With a gesture, energy arcs erupted from her hands, cutting through the nearest wave of attackers with precise, controlled bursts. The air vibrated with the hum of unleashed power. Tony moved alongside her, using cover to protect fleeing civilians, while simultaneously neutralizing smaller threats. He glanced at her, astonished at the harmony of destruction and grace she wielded. "Sophie, you've grown beyond anything I imagined." Her gaze flicked to him, a fleeting moment of softness in the midst of chaos. But Dravik advanced, stepping through the smoke like a shadow, every movement calculated. "Power is meaningless without restraint," he said, "and restraint is exactly what I intend to break." Sophie's hands pulsed with silver light, arcs snapping toward him. The first strike met his armor, sending him staggering back, but not down. He recovered instantly, eyes narrowing with a predatory glint. "You think this city can save you? You think your human companion can protect you?" Tony's fists clenched. "We'll see about that." The clash that followed shook the streets like an earthquake. Sophie's energy collided with Dravik's weaponized devices, sparks flying, concrete cracking, the city trembling under the sheer force of their duel. Each strike was a declaration. Sophie was no longer a pawn. She was a storm, alive with power and defiance. And Dravik was forced to reckon with the unexpected, that the servant he had underestimated was now a force capable of challenging his empire. As the dust and energy arcs swirled around them, one truth became undeniable. The war for Sophie and the city itself had truly begun.